Okay, I'd like to spend about 8 minutes or so now unpacking a little bit further, some of those ideas that came up in the previous video. We've set our focuses on the Chinese Communist Party's rule and taking power, even before their rule, of the People's Republic of China. Now, there's a period of war against the Japanese that starts in 1931. We've got China in civil war after the defeat of the Japanese in 1945. And in 1949, we have the rise of, or the declaration of, the People's Republic of China. People's Republic of China continues to the present. The leader of Mao Zedong in People's Republic of China in 1949 was Mao Zedong, who died in 1976. And here's our focus point. There's a problem with Mao, and the problem is his legacy. There's a real challenge in separating the man from the myth. There's a whole dictatorship, one-party state in China, the People's Republic of China, which has deliberately built a cult of personality around him. He is the focal point of official communist ideology in China. He's the party figurehead. He's the equivalent of modern China to what someone like George Washington is to the United States. So there's a myth and a reality surrounding Mao Zedong that we have to be very, very wary of. He's an incredibly important figure to this day, and his death toll is concealed behind this shroud, this veil. And I'm going to throw this word out here, a bamboo curtain, that conceals what he's done to some extent from the rest of the world. So let's get through a few of these key concepts. Chinese Communist Party take power October 1st, 1949, after a civil war. They then set about creating and consolidating this communist, and I'm putting air quotes around it, Maoist one-party state. And that process continues to this day. The one-party state may have changed the way it consolidates power using social media and technology and so forth, but it is still consolidating that power. I'm putting air quotes around communist and Maoist because we have to unpack that a little bit. And I'm going to suggest to you that in some ways it's a little bit of a distraction to really try to come to too much detailed understanding of what it means to be a communist, because there's a pretty clear possibility that Mao's not really following that ideology too closely. He might use the words, but is he living it? He talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. Okay, during this consolidation of power in 1949, there's immediately a move by the Communist Party to purge from government anyone who may be loyal to the old regime. So we're talking in this early stage around 1949, maybe to 1950, hundreds of thousands of deaths, but it's very hard to access those figures. Certainly we've got large examples of massacres and so on taking place in those early days. Our next period of Communist Party control in China is the period of the land reform movement. It starts in 1950 and continues into the late 1950s, but elements of it continue well into the 1960s and so on. Now, what's this period really about? It's about redistributing land in the countryside. The peasantry made up 85% of the countryside. The Communist Party is setting about taking power off wealthy peasants, what they called the landowners, and giving it to the poorer peasants, redistributing land ownership. Now, there's a lot of conversation around that, but we've essentially got at the point of a gun, China, the Chinese government, the Communist Party under Mao Zedong, changing the way land is owned across the majority of people's villages, experience of China. Okay, how many people died during this period? About 5 million, as best we can tell. The next period you need to be aware of is the Great Leap Forward. Fantastic name. May not, however, have been a great leap forward. In many cases, it was a failure and a step backwards for China. And statistics might show that. Some really good sources in statistics. This Great Leap Forward existed between 1958 and 1962. And at the end of 1962, Mao sort of gets sidelined a bit by the Communist Party. It's considered his period where he hasn't quite done as well. He's fallible. This great idea he has not necessarily paid off. What's it basically about? Modernizing China, turning China from an agricultural state into an industrial powerhouse. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union set about catching up with the West, catching up with particularly the United States. Mao is trying to get China to catch up with Britain at this time by building economic, industrial strength, focusing on iron and steel production, building industry where no industry had existed before. Around this time, we're talking approximately 40 million deaths take place. So if we're doing a little bit of a running total here, you can see why we really have to think about Mao's legacy. Is he the great leader of the People's Republic of China, as those in the Communist Party might like to present him, or is he some sort of monster? These deaths are taking place on his watch. After 1962, as I say, for a few years, Mao's still in the picture, but he's a little bit sidelined. He doesn't enjoy the prestige in the Communist Party that he might have done up until 62. There's a variety of end dates of this Cultural Revolution. 69, when Mao said, I'm finishing up, that's it, we're done. 1971, when an important leader in the Communist Party, possibly some might suggest a future rival of Mao Zedong, Lin Biao, dies. Plane crash. Gosh, what are the chances of that happening? Or just a horrible, horrible accident in which one of Mao's rivals dies in a plane crash. What are the chances? Was it assassination? Pretty much anyone who understands time says yes. Can we actually prove it? Because it happened in a one-party totalitarian state who controlled all the evidence? Not really. But 1971, another possible date. 1976, Mao dies. Certainly at that stage, Deng Xiaoping, Mao's successor, begins dismantling any aspects that remain of this Cultural Revolution. What's the Cultural Revolution about? Well, I've said on the screen here, it's a period of purges within the Communist Party, within government. There's a sense that there are non-loyal ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of seeing the world, if you like, cultures within China. And so the Communist Party must purify itself of these foreign cultures, foreign ways, foreign attitudes. So loyalty during this period was defined as adhering not so much to communists, but to Mao Zedong thought. And Mao Zedong thought is a very flexible sort of concept, and only Mao himself seems to be able to define it. About 10 million people or so certainly died during this period. A little bit of a thought for you to bear in mind here. Do not spend your time being distracted by understanding what a communist really believes. Communist Marxist ideology is helpful to some extent. We will explain bits of it, but it might not really help you get to the heart of Mao and Mao's China. The one-party state that emerges under Mao calls itself communist, but perhaps it's really about power. And I've said that in the screen here. Think about this. They might talk this talk of communism, but they don't walk the walk of it. Ideology might be a secondary motivation to the maintenance of power. So be conscious of the propaganda and sources. We see these images of Mao being a great figure, looking after people, land of plenty. But propaganda is not necessarily the truth. Think of that adamant analogy. We break down our sources. Okay, so I'm going to rattle through this last bit for you. I'd like to finish in under 10 minutes here. What I want you to think about is, although the stats used in this cartoon are problematic, it does raise some interesting comparisons. And a key comparison we can make here is of Mao to Stalin. Frank Dikötter has actually said, and I quite like Frank Dikotter's work, he is a reasonably reputable historian. He suggests that the total number of deaths that are linked to Mao is at least 45 million, which takes him past Stalin. Stalin's compared to the Soviet dictator, Mao's compared to the Soviet dictator Stalin because he's a contemporary. They live in the same era. At least there's an overlap there. Stalin is the communist dictator of the Soviet Union in the 1930s through to 1953 at his death. That's him there. Mao and Stalin suggest they are part of a lineage of communist thinkers that go back to Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, with his friend, actually his financier, if you like, Friedrich Engels. These two writers were writing in Industrial Revolution Britain. Their ideas are picked up by a Bolshevik, a communist in Russia, who founds the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1917 with a revolution, Lenin. Lenin ultimately is succeeded by Stalin. Mao Zedong is the last in that line. Mao Zedong has his own set of ideas. He doesn't talk much about the Communist Manifesto. In fact, during the Cultural Revolution, it'd probably be fairly dangerous to be waving around the Communist Manifesto because it would be perhaps inconsistent with Mao Zedong thought. Mao Zedong thought comes up in a little red book, and I'll show you a copy of the little red book that I've got, a 1967 version. It's not a first edition, but I'll bring that in. It's an English language version. The Quotations of Chairman Mao, okay, is its official name. The little red book with a vinyl cover and so on is the source of Mao Zedong thought. Okay, so we might leave that there, except for one last thing, by the way. Mao dies on September 9th, 1976, bringing to an end our unit. So we've got a few ideas here coming together, and that's him lying in state and people inspecting his body. So we'll leave it there.